Otherworldlyculture.com presents a panel discussion with Alyson Court, moderated by Michael Exler and recorded at the Horror Realm 2025 convention in Pittsburgh.
All right, everybody, thank you for coming today to Horror Realm in Pittsburgh. The panel's going to start now with Alyson Court.
How are you, Mike?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for taking some time to speak with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming to listen to me babble.
So what drew you to the entertainment industry?
Oh, boy. That's a really good question. I think just growing up in a household with parents who had a love for the arts. So neither of them worked in the arts really professionally. My dad worked with like the Heritage Foundation for the government, and my mom worked for a big insurance company. But it was very, if you've seen Mad Men, the insurance company was very like, it was your life in a way, and they had, you know, a glee club and a theater group and like sociables, and it was very, you know, all encompassing. So my mom was always involved with all of those extracurriculars, and she actually would be with in her spare time, she was with the Canadian Opera Company, just as they were called supers. So like the extras on stage, they wouldn't sing or anything like that, but they filled in the background stuff. And so when I was 6 years old, I actually was watching her do a rehearsal with the opera company, and it was for Carmen, and the director asked if I would be interested in playing the child in Madame Butterfly, which they were going to be doing a few months later. And at first I said no, and then I got to go backstage with my mom and see how friendly everybody was. And it was that wonderful, nurturing, just welcoming vibe backstage that made me say at 6 that, okay, maybe I do want to do something like this. And I guess I caught the bug, and that was that. But yeah, having parents who, you know, it was just, they exposed me at an early age to a lot of wonderful different things. Mm-hmm. And that kind of allowed it to happen.
Very cool.
Thanks.
So what are some of the main differences between voice acting and traditional acting for you?
Well, with voice acting, you don't have to put on makeup. Half the time now, thanks to COVID and recording remotely, you don't have to put on pants. So I'd say that's a difference.
So you can record from home for projects?
Yeah. It was the industry that actually kept our economy going in the early days of COVID. It was when everything shut down in March of 2020. It took about 2 weeks to get, like, the studios actually sent out these home studio kits and helped all of our actors get set up remotely.
Oh, wow.
And after about 2 weeks, we were able to start recording again. And then the industry just went crazy. It exploded because they found out very quickly that we were able to keep going, and everybody else in the world was stuck at home, you know, not allowed to move, and just consuming content.
Right.
So it was that switch to remote recording. It was a game changer in so many ways. And nowadays people can still do that too. We're doing the hybrid model. I know in a lot of places they've got now this forced back to work for some reason, which, like, there are pros and cons. I think people should be able to work where they feel most comfortable, as long as where they're most productive, right? So a hybrid model I'm a big fan of. And we still, if people need to record remotely, we will, as long as their studio setup is good and, you know, there's not a lot of outside interference. But a lot of actors, myself included, will, even if you have the home setup, will still choose to go into the studio because there's just a different vibe. It's the same reason a lot of people want to go back to work at the office. It's just no home distractions. It helps to, I think, mentally, you know, have to brush your teeth, have to put pants on, you know, go someplace and just focus on the work at hand and be with your peers. And especially with voice work, I really think it's important to give actors a chance to play off of each other whenever possible. You will always get a better performance.
Do you normally work off each other? Because I've talked to other people that do voice acting, Tony Todd being one of them, and he said he would just go in a box, record his lines, and leave.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who do that. And a lot of people who, like, you know, if they have 5 bookings in one day, they're like, no, I need to be in and out, and they go in and they do their thing, and that's fine. But I directed a show called Cupcake and Dino, and this was in the before times, before COVID. And it became this really unique show that a lot of other producers started to want to copy, and they were calling it booth driven, because it was a comedy for kids. But we would have the script, and I'd have my actors in, and I would actually have them do super long passes. We'd go for, like, if it was an 11-minute script, I'd have them do about half of it in one pass. And they just knew, you know, you learn some basic techniques where it's like, okay, you can have 4 pages spread out on your stand, and then you guys will just wait, change, and keep going. And the reason we did that is it allowed, and I would have like 3 or 4 actors in the booth at once, because these were comedy guys and and improv guys, and the kind of incredible, like, in the moment gold material that you would get from them being free to play. Most of the time when you watch the episode, it's from their ad-libbing. So we would go through the script twice, as written for the most part. And then I'd say, all right, we got what we needed, 3rd time, and I'd say take 5 minutes. We'd turn off the microphone so they would feel comfortable in the booth. They'd work some stuff out, and then we'd go through it one more time, and it would be with them improvising, and like everybody in the control room, we would be on the floor in stitches. And our director, who, like, it was his show he had created, and he'd be like, all right, I'm rewriting the script, I'm taking that, I've got to change the boards and change the panels, I know how this is going to work. But it came from this incredible, like, place of just spontaneity and comedic genius. And as a result, lots of other shows started to want to do that, and they would bring me in to direct. They're like, how did you do that? And I said, well, I didn't get in the way of the actors, you know? So when you have a show like that, a booth, and you want booth driven, and you want that chemistry between your actors, it's essential to have people together. But you could do that, we did that during COVID, even with people remotely. So we could have 2 actors on remotely, and then we could have 2 actors in the big studio with like a divider in between, you know, the big plastic stuff, and everybody stayed away from each other. And then there was an ISO booth. So we'd have 3 actors technically in person and 2 on remotely, and that's how we did all of our My Little Pony records. So we were still able to get that chemistry, and I think it's essential. So I can understand the need to be able to record people individually when schedules don't line up, but your performance is always going to be better if it's together, unless you have people who don't play well with others. Like when I was directing Magic School Bus, Rides Again, we recorded 7 of the 8 kids together. And we would do it in like groups of 4. So we'd have a group of 4 in the morning, a group of 3 in the afternoon, and then the 1 kid. He's a great kid, incredibly talented and smart, but just quirky, dry sense of humor. He was like a 40-year-old man in an 11-year-old's body. And so you'd watch him, and he'd be in this booth with the other kids, and you could tell he was just miserable. He did not like children. So we learned very quickly, just record him separately, and everything's fine. Yeah.
So one of your earlier roles, you were in Star Wars Ewoks.
Yes.
How did you get involved in that, and talk about working on that show?
I was 11 years old, and that was my very first cartoon that I booked, and it was Nelvana. Nelvana is based in Toronto, and that's where I've lived my entire life. So being a kid acting in the 80s, and Nelvana also did live action shows as well back then. And there was a show called Edison Twins. So I had done a few episodes of Edison Twins and auditioned for, and worked on pretty much all of the different Nelvana live action shows that they were doing at the time. And so it was just an audition like anything else. You get called and you have to go in and do that character, but it was a unique experience because, of course, it has to, everything that you do with your face and your body, it now has to come out through your voice. So it was a great learning experience. And it led to all of the other cartoons after that because Nelvana, again, was very, very loyal. Once they hired you, if they liked you, they would want you on every show. So the kids that I worked with back in the 80s, you'll see our names like Hadley Kay and Stuart Stone and Cree Summer, and Noam Zilberman. Like our names will be on like all of the credits for those cartoons because Nelvana would put us on every show.
Is that how you got involved in Mad Balls and My Pet Monster?
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so funnily enough, My Pet Monster was supposed to be the live action.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if anybody has ever seen the live action. They call it the live action movie. It was actually the pilot. So we shot that first episode as the pilot for the live action My Pet Monster series. And I didn't even have to audition for it. At that point, they knew that I was going to play Melanie. And Sonny, who ends up playing Max, he was he was the younger brother on that series I mentioned earlier called Edison Twins. It was the live action series that Nelvana had been filming for many, many years. So again, very, very loyal. They had a handful of kids that they loved to put on everything. And they had sort of been going back and forth between Sonny and Sean Roberge and Lee Max Walton. And all three of them were great. And Sean Roberge, even though he didn't get My Pet Monster, he ended up being the boy on a show called Mr. TNT, starring Mr. T. Yeah. Beauty the Fool. Yeah. So again, very, very loyal. But Sonny ended up being the brother on My Pet Monster, and that's how, he's one of my closest friends.
Okay.
So we ended up acting on tons of stuff together and stayed close throughout our lives. He DJ'd my wedding reception, the first one. And that's, so like I said, Nelvana, again, very loyal, and that's how I got My Pet Monster. And there were a lot of issues with My Pet Monster, the live action, primarily. Like, you've all heard the stories of Steven Spielberg with Jaws. Sharks down, shark is working and rolling, sharks down, right? My Pet Monster was a little similar because the costume, that giant blue monster costume, that wasn't CG.
Yeah.
There was an actor named Mark who was inside that costume, and the blue dye never dried. So Mark would come out and he looked like a Smurf.
Oh, man.
It was awful. And then what was worse is it was quite a heavy harness. So the straps would dig into his skin and he was getting these awful wounds. And then the blue dye was getting into the wound. It was just a nightmare for him. I mean, he did it and we made the episode, but it was rough. And after that, they're like, we're also an animation company. Maybe we should just do that. And so they did it as a cartoon instead.
That's cool. Were you aware that both of those toy lines are highly collectible today?
Yes.
Very cool.
Yes, I have one Mad Ball somewhere in a box, probably at my mom's house. But yeah, those things are great. I would love for that to come back out. And My Pet Monster, I don't have one because now they're it's between $300 and $600 people are selling those toys
Especially
for.
if it has the chain and
Yeah.
how good the feet are.
Yeah, and I mean, I get it, but it's
It's pretty crazy.
I'm kicking myself for not keeping mine because I'm pretty sure the Nelvana guys gave me one way back when.
You were also in the Garbage Pail Kids TV show,
Mhm.
where you played several different characters. I always wondered, how do you work through that to keep the character straight for the voices, the cadence, the pitch, the tones? How do you do that?
That was a really good experience for me. Again, it was a show that we recorded ensemble, and that was the first show that I worked with Tara on. So Tara Strong, formerly Tara Cherndorf, and she and I actually went to school together, and we were friends, but I'd never worked with her before. And we did Garbage Pail Kids Ensemble. I was Terry Cloth. That was my main role on that. But I remember the first time that our director, Michael, he actually assigned Tara a second character, and I watched her completely change her voice, and I was like, you're like 13 and you can do that? How do you do that? And so it was the first time that it occurred to me that I could do a voice that didn't sound like my own. Okay, that's weird. And when, I think it was Lizzie, she was like a snake kind of character. Michael Hack assigned to me. He was like, okay, next episode you're going to do this secondary character. So I went home and I was like, what do I do? And my mom was the one who was like, well, if there's a snake to it, like play around with the S's, draw them out, and try to use a different part of your voice. And she really worked with me on that one. But it was certainly completely inspired by Tara and watching what she could do. And she was the same age as me. So yeah, that kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities. Yeah.
So you voiced Lydia Deetz in Beetlejuice, which I read is your favorite role. Is that true?
It is.
Why is that?
Duh. Have you not seen the movie or watched the cartoon? It's Lydia. She's the coolest, but she's also not. She's not super cartoony in that over-the-top, in-your-face kind of way that so many of the characters are. She just has a slightly more laid-back, chill vibe, but she's kind, she's fun, she's playful, but she's pensive. She has empathy. She doesn't take herself too seriously, and she loves the macabre. Like that. So that love. I grew up on horror movies. Like I think I saw Salem's Lot on my grandma's TV when I was 6 years old. Blew my mind because they killed a kid, and then the kid comes back as the vampire, knocking on his brother's window and his friend's window, and I was like, oh, you can do that? What? So after that, like, hooked on horror all my life. I grew up with a poster of Freddy Krueger over my bed. That's my jam.
The perfect role for you.
So Lydia was absolutely the perfect role, and I went to see the movie with my parents in the movie theater. I was in grade 9. It was right before it was right before my 14th birthday. And I remember watching it, and my mom turned to me and she's like, you better hope Nelvana gets the rights to the cartoon. And you gotta do this role. And I'm like, yep. And a year later, I was 15, and it was not long after my 15th birthday, and that's when the breakdown went out. They were doing the Beetlejuice cartoon, and I studied Winona Ryder's voice. I studied it, I recorded it, and I did the whole, she's sleeping with Prince Valium tonight. That whole kind of dry, a little bit nasally, a little bit up here, and very not overly emotional. And I got the part, and then they told me, we're kind of changing the dynamic of the relationship between Beetlejuice and Lydia. We're making her younger, making him a bit more goofy and playful and less pedophile-ish. We want you to go more with your own natural voice. And I remember actually being devastated because I was like, finally, I got a job where it's like a different voice and I worked on it really hard. So they allowed me, I'm like, can it be a little nasalier? And so they wanted her younger and a little bit more energetic than in the movie, but I was allowed to kind of do this hybrid voice. And then those sessions were just a blast. Like, those episodes were so funny, and I was always in the booth with Steven. And occasionally when we would have big scenes together, like Len Carlson would be there, Liz Hanna, Ron Rubin. Best times.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. One last character I want to talk to you about before we take some questions from the audience is Claire Redfield.
Yes.
How were you able to get that role?
That was because Capcom had come over to Toronto to make the Marvel vs. Capcom video games, and they wanted to use the same recording studio, the same director, and the same cast. They wanted to have the real voice actors for the video game, so that's how they got to meet all of the Toronto voice actors. And that basically forged a relationship between Capcom Japan and Toronto. So they decided, okay, let's explore this voice scene and see if we can do more stuff here. And I believe the very first production that they did after the Marvel vs. Capcom was Resident Evil 2. So they put out the breakdown like any other voice audition. And Susan Hart, who had been the recording coordinator for the X-Men cartoon and X-Men video game, she ended up, that became her first opportunity to direct. So she had me come in. She described Claire to me as similar to Jubilee, in the sense that she was this, it's a much more serious world. It's not like a Saturday morning cartoon, but she's like Jubilee's more serious older sister. A little bit of a fish out of water scenario again, but not cartoony sounding. And I auditioned for it, and that's how I got the part.
What does it mean to be part of one of the most iconic video game series there is, and such a major role in it as well?
So Lydia's my favorite character, but Claire means the most to me because that's my child. My child came from that relationship.
Oh,
Yeah, so working on Resident Evil 2 and then Code Veronica, that's how I met Eric Suzuki. And then we got married, and I now have a son who's now 22 years old, but product of that relationship, so by far the most important role in franchise. And so, I mean, it means everything. It means everything. But from a fan perspective, being part of something that I didn't know what it was when I was working on it at the time. They called it Adventure Game Number 2 because, very protective. They didn't have the whole NDA thing sorted out back then. But my goodness, you would think that you were like working on the cure for cancer or something with how protective they are. It's bonkers. So it was a very different experience initially because, again, I was mostly in the booth by myself, and they wouldn't really explain what was going on, which I guess helped in many ways, because Claire, when she's there and she's going through the police station and everything else, it's like she doesn't understand what's going on. She was just looking for her brother, and things have gone insane. So it was a very isolating experience. I can remember feeling very like alone in this booth, because of course after you would record something, then they would turn off the mic and you would see everybody discussing things in the control room, but you had no idea what they were saying. And it wasn't until the trade show the following, like half a year later, when I was there as Lunette, and I could hear from the next booth, it was a PlayStation booth, and I could hear myself screaming. And that's when I was like, wait, that's me. And I went over to see what it was. Like, wait, so it's called Resident Evil 2, okay. And I'm there in my little clown costume and telling all these like bro dudes in their suits looking super cool. I'm like, that's me. And they're like, goodbye, little girl. Yeah, that was a weird experience. And then I remember when the reviews came out, and I guess, back then the voices in video games, they didn't necessarily put a lot into caring about the acting per se. And so when Resident Evil 2 came out and the reviews were actually really complimentary for our performances, that's when friends started to send me like all of this stuff, and they're like, you have no idea, this is a huge game, and like this is a big impact. So when they came back for Code Veronica, I had a better idea of what I was in for. And it was, that was a wild experience too. Very different game. Very weird game. Very hard game.
Very hard.
Have you guys played Code Veronica? Have you finished it? No, a lot of like, throw your controller.
Why am I playing this?
Yeah, like why am I choosing to do this to myself, right? It's so hard, but it is fun. It is wacky. So yeah, getting to do stuff like that, it's great.
Right.
And I love, so a lot of voice actors, they don't like doing the damage stuff and the screaming and the grunting and like, okay, scream like you're on fire, now scream like you've been stabbed, scream like you've got a broken leg, scream like your toe is on fire and you're also falling, right? I love that stuff. I love it. So getting to go into a booth and do that and like scream and just like be in pain, and it was so much fun.
Very cool. So who has a question for Alyson? Anyone in the audience?
So doing something like Resident Evil,
Yeah.
how much time is that compared to doing like a season of Beetlejuice? Is it equivalent? Is it a lot more for one than the other?
No, it would be, so Resident Evil, because you had the team coming over from Japan and, you know, they're staying in hotels and there's expenses associated. When we did Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica, we would try to get in there in, you know, back-to-back days and get as much recorded as possible up front. And then, you know, like 6 months later, they would come back, or 4 months, to do an ADR session, and, you know, it would, again, be several days, but it was all done in like a one lump sum. With a TV series like with Beetlejuice, it would be, you know, an episode every week or every 2 weeks, depending on how many episodes we were doing that season. So it wasn't crammed all into one session. But when I directed Outbreak, so I directed the voices and the motion capture for Resident Evil Outbreak. And that was really spread out because it was such a different beast. It was the first time we were doing localized motion capture and all of these different scenarios, and it was the first time it was an online multiplayer game. The chat system, everything was brand new. So there was a lot of like measuring 3 times, cutting 3 times, remeasuring, cutting again. Like there was a lot of back and forth, way more than when we did the previous 2 games, because it was brand new. Like this was, you know, for all of the flaws, you wouldn't have those multiplayer games that you can talk online to each other and back and forth, had it not been for games like Outbreak that were the flagship games for the PS2.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I'm probably the most proud of that game out of all of the Resident Evil games. I think Outbreak I'm most proud of.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Whenever you summon Beetlejuice as Lydia Deetz, you always do it differently. You know, even though it's Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
I was wondering, was that a choice that was made, or was it just because?
Yeah, I didn't want it to sound like it was a copy and paste.
Yeah.
You know, and so I wanted it each moment. And also, if she's summoning him for different reasons, if she's like really, oh no, something really bad happened, there should be urgency. If she's like bored or kind of ticked off at her mom, have a little bit of the snark in there. Or if it's like, yes, we're gonna go on an adventure, then I want the joy to be there. So yeah, I'm glad that you noticed that it was different, because yeah, that did matter to me. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, thank you again for taking some time.
Thank you.
And give a round of applause for Alyson. audience here and get an autograph from the photo.
So much, guys. All right.
Otherworldlyculture.com. Subscribe, like, and comment on our posts all over social media and our site, otherworldlyculture.com.